Hi everyone, and welcome to the Imagining a New We video blog with me, Dr. Samantha Cutrara, a video series designed to help history teachers and other history educators teach history in ways that are more transformative, meaningful, and inclusive for their students. We are in week 3 of social distancing, social isolation because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I posed a question on week 2 of social isolation that said, how do we teach history after this? And that has led to some really great conversations. And so I'm going to be doing a video series having conversations with historians, with educators, with archivists, with creators about what history might look like after this moment when we get back to our classrooms, whether that is virtually or in person. Today we're going to be talking with Chris Sanagan. Chris is an archivist, the co-creator and writer of the Group of 7 comic books, and so he's going to have a lot of really great insights based on both this very formal background as an archivist, but then this imaginative background as a comic book creator. So let's go over to Chris. Chris, it's so great to talk with you today. Thank you so much for making time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Happy to join.
I've been thinking about you a lot because of both your role as an archivist and your role as a comic book creator, because this notion of both documentation and also this artistic response to this moment, I think that you have a lot of experience that brings in both of those things. So I'm really hoping that we'll be able to talk about kind of both of those areas of your life today.
Absolutely. Happy to chat about both for sure. Yeah.
That's awesome. Oh, sorry, that was a cat. Okay, so the first question is, I was saying to people that I've really been thinking about history itself, history as a discipline, and the stories that we tell as history differently because of this. Are we able to capture, for example, the anxiety of this moment or the anxiety of any moment in the histories that we have? And a lot of that comes down to records. So have you thought of history differently because of this moment? Is that something that you've been thinking about at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been thinking a lot from the archival perspective about the documentation of this event specifically, and just general response, because historically, at least, how, when I think of archives, I think of what first attracted me to archives and why I decided to pursue a career in archives, there was a level of removal of myself from the documentation. There was a gap. There was a literal time gap. Right. And so, when we think of items or artifacts of the past, they were interesting and they were attractive and they were fascinating. And so the challenge I think that we are going through now, at least I think that archivists are going to have, and certainly archivists I know are currently in the works on, is having that sense of removal from the content currently to which we're working on. So there's a real, when I think of the projects, for example, the archival projects that I've worked on, there's a real physical and time removal from, working on records from, 20, 30, 100 years ago. And so now we're currently in the moment of working on records, but also living that life at the same time. So I think there's a challenge. There's a challenge of, it's not necessarily, I don't think we're at the point now of thinking of being impartial to the records that we're trying to capture. I think as this is currently, we're in the early stages, generally speaking, of thinking about how to best document what's happening right now. And that is a new experience for me as an archivist, because I've never been in the moment in which I'm trying to document. Right. I guess is the way.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, and because I'm thinking too about like, one of the historians I talked to, she said that in her history classes, she's a history professor. Saying to students like, what is an archive? Like, is your Facebook an archive? And it's kind of interesting now because we are creating so many digital records, like for young people to really think about their documentation and their records and like what that looks like, and then in 100 years what will be the most valuable in capturing this moment.
Right, because that's the other piece too, is the value question, right? Because we are constantly documenting. Well, I should say that, through various channels and technologies, we have the ability to continuously document and curate, and our responses, our lives, what else is going on. I've always, some of the more interesting responses I've seen to this particular event, I keep calling it an event. I should just call it coronavirus or COVID-19, like it's something I can't talk about, right? But really, what I is I've seen grab a pen, start a diary, like do a daily log of what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, what you're feeling, which are the types of the types of primary sources that end up in archives at some point, right? And they tend to be the real rich, the real rich sources of social history, or have been in the past. The interesting challenge with that is, and this might be something. This is a great question for certainly demographics that use these channels more often, whether they're younger or whether it happens to be. I don't know if they think of what they're doing when I think of like my Instagram feed, or if I think of my Twitter feed, or whatever it is, capturing those moments, capturing those feelings, everything from anxiety and anguish to regular daily silliness and rigmarole, really the full scope, the full spectrum of life during living through COVID-19, the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if there is a realization generally of what we're doing in terms of capturing, sharing, documenting, that these will be the artifacts depending on their survival and depending on how technology changes, and depending on how we can capture it and maintain the quality of the information and the access to the information, that these will be the artifacts and the items that in 5, 10, 15, 25 years, we'll look towards in some capacity to give us an idea of what we were feeling, what we were thinking, to remind ourselves, and then to use those as resources. The thing that I'm finding interesting though is we don't know a timeline yet, right? So we don't have a sense of, and in fact, this is not unique to our time or our age. During times of global calamity and crisis, there have been multiple documentary efforts. I think because we don't know, or it's interesting because we have a pseudo timeline where we understand what's happening in the world. We understand we get daily updates on response, how things are tracking, hopefully positively. So there is something of an assumption within, I think, society that hopefully we will see the end of this in 2 to 3 months. I'll just say that. As that's kind of, fingers crossed. That's kind of what we're doing now. The interesting thing is I marry that against the first assumptions of when the First World War would have ended, and it was by Christmas.
Yeah.
Things are great. So we obviously it's a different extreme. However, we are experiencing a bit of the same kind of, I think, feeling towards engaging with the future possibility of this being over sooner, hopefully, rather than later. And in the meantime, our daily documentation of this is going to provide that recap. That now the secondary question, moving on to that, is the value piece. Like, what is valuable? What will be valuable to preserve for long term, to represent what we've been going through.
You bring up some really interesting things here, and like I want to like say like how you talked about the event, right? Like you keep saying that this is an event, and then also that we want a timeline, and for me that really highlights like how much we think of history, for example, as
Right.
like these spaces, these bound spaces. And I'm just going to bring in some postmodern theory right now, but like Foucault, for example, said that we should always strive for a messy history because life is messy. And like being in this moment right now, this moment we don't know how long it's going to be, I think demonstrates that messiness and all these different pieces, because I too have been seeing, for example, things that are saying like pick up a pen and write a diary, which is so interesting because of how much we're on our computers and our phones. And when I think about like students in K to 12 classes and like how we bring them more into the conversation of history, like is that the media that they are going to be gravitating towards? Are we going to be able to capture their like their experiences? And so you bring up some really kind of interesting elements of how we think of history as very kind of neat and clean, and even archives as neat and clean. But of course, as an archivist, you know that's not true. But like, how can we teach a more messy history? And then, like, I think that is a more rhetorical question. But maybe a better question is, how do you think we would teach history after this moment? And I know, I mean, you do teach history a little bit because you do workshops with your comic book, but can you think about maybe like in the future what this might look like this teaching history, this presenting history after this moment?
You bring up such a great point of the messiness of history, and or at least how certainly versus the nice streamlined approach perhaps we've taken certainly to this point or in the past. I think when it's interesting because you talk about like events or timelines or those kinds of pieces, it's gonna really take a change in perspective going from the teaching moving forward, a real paradigm shift or at least I know it's already out there and there's been excellent thinking about it, but really compartmentalizing in your head this that it's not that world, that activity is not clean and is very much right. And I think it's in, and that brings in other pieces too, because there's a real mental health response to this event as well.
Right.
And when we talk about anxiety and all these pieces too, or working from home and trying to have juggle the kids as well, and like how do you compartmentalize that? And so I think moving forward, the challenge is really going to be, getting to a place of understanding and comfort mentally with dealing with the fact that we don't know the answers, we don't have the information, and even the information that we do document is representative of, say, someone's experience, which is valuable, but may only be representative of their experience. And so it's not necessarily the narrative. Like I think when I was thinking of this, when the questions you were thinking, when you had sent earlier was, oh, well, you could say, one could argue that, well, I know exactly what's happening because I'm looking at my feeds, my social media feeds. And at any point in time, I can understand what's going on in Italy. I can understand what's going on in China because I'm getting fed information. And I see that, oh, well, I mean, I can certainly comment on it, or I have an idea of a viewpoint, or, but really those are just based on assumption, because these channels that we interact with are almost 100% self-curated. So we're choosing.
Yeah. We're
choosing the stories we want to hear. And again, I think that probably goes back to the mental part of it as well, and the compartmentalization and somewhat of an order perspective of having that information, the dissemination of that information. But I was thinking about this, just thinking about how, my feeds are absolutely curated towards what I want to hear, my friends, my family. And so the challenge will be, how are we documenting the stories or the activity of what's going on that we're not assuming is coming through our channels?
Sorry, I'm laughing because the internet just slowed, so it was just like stories, and it just got really slow.
Oh well, it's noon here too, and so I'm
I think that brings up such a great point. So I wrote an article a couple of years ago called "The Subjectivity of the Archives," based on my work with the digital humanities at York, and about and how, for example, in history teaching, we're when we use primary sources, we can bring in this history that we can now explore as evidence, but that there's all subjectivities. It's a choice of what you're choosing. It's a choice that what was saved. It was a choice that what was recorded. It's a choice of what the archivist thought was important. And I love this idea. Well, I love the idea that you're bringing up, not the idea that we're all just in our little mini curated bubbles, but we are in our little mini curated bubbles, right? It'll be interesting, the kind of the narratives that float to the top. And something that came up in another video was how much do you, as a history teacher, and I know you're not necessarily a history teacher, although you do some teaching, is how much do you share the stage with your students? And so if you're just thinking about your own experiences and what you saw through your own feed, then you are ignoring the fact that your students had a much different experience because of their own kind of curated bubbles. So anyway, just thanks for bringing that up.
No problem. There's also the point too that archivists try to, generally speaking, I think certainly when I joined the gig 15 years ago, the teaching was that archivists need to be impartial and unbiased and all these great things about attempting to document human activity or the scope of human activity. And the reality, and certainly there's been much more thinking and much more I think general dissemination of the idea that we absolutely carry our own biases regardless of being archivists. We're humans. Mm-hmm. So we bring those forward. So to your point, not just what's being documented, but the access tools, how we describe, all the discoverability of these pieces moving forward are really fascinating challenges to deconstruct.
No, that's really interesting. And I think those are kind of cool questions for teachers to pose to their students too. What is of value to keep to record this moment? And the decisions that we make a month out from being back in the classroom, will those be different than if it was a year out? The answer is yes, of course, but to think about that. That's that's really interesting. Maybe we can just turn to our last question. So, as you know, the video series is Imagining a New We. And the idea is that with this Imagining a New We, I argue that we need to find ways to be able to have greater circles of inclusion, and that we need to imagine a more cohesive kind of multicultural, but so many different cultures, not just like racial or ethnic cultures, to think about new ways and imagine new ways of being together. And so I talk a lot about connection, complexity, and care. I talk a lot about using creative nonfiction. I talk a lot about affective, emotional responses to history. Could you comment maybe about this notion of imagining and this notion of we right now? And I am bringing up imagining in particular because of your own work as the co-creator of the Group of 7 comic books and being the writer of them. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit. About, do you think that creative nonfiction, for example, comic book responses, artistic responses, is going to be a way that we can keep imagining us together?
Yes.
Okay, great. Question done. We can just move on.
Simple. I think, imagining, reimagining, thinking of future approaches to this and current approaches, it really is, I think, for lack of a better term, interdisciplinary, in the sense where I think And I suppose you're talking about
so much. I'm sorry to interrupt you like mid-sentence, but that's coming up so much. And I love that. I love this notion that we need to think of this in more interdisciplinary ways, because the more disciplinary things, the more things get chopped up. But imagining a new we can really be these circles of inclusion. So anyway, I just wanted to, I like that part. So keep going.
Nope, that's good. I'm glad.
Great. Glad we agree.
Yeah. Yeah, I just feel like, for example, writing Group of Seven, which is, an alternative history comic book, featuring, tropes and events and personalities from Canadian history, thrown together in a narrative that is completely fictional yet is inspired by a real history, I think is an example of certainly it's an example of the I'm trying to think of, not impact, but it's
Response?
just an example of, sorry?
Response?
Yeah, response could be, and or just even as an artifact, maybe even going back to the documentary piece, that engages engages in a different manner, but share some of the same objectives as traditional teaching of history would be. I would argue. In the sense that the response it often gets or has received when we talk about, we've done some, you mentioned earlier, we've done some in-class sessions with teachers working with different, whether it's younger grades or in fact, actually, comics in the classroom, working specifically with tying into, say, the grade 10 history curriculum currently in Ontario. We've seen the emotional response that students have given us from picking up the comic book, the artifact itself, as opposed to picking up a textbook. Now both have their merits. One should not replace the other. But going back to your question about what is the future kind of look like, and reimagining a we, I think this is where art and culture have a lot to say with delivering impact upon these resources to different audiences. One thing that I'm really noticing, being part of this, this is something that I've only been doing for the past 3 to 5 years, so I still consider myself a bit of a newbie at it, but it's opened up this other community for me that I was never part of. And by that I mean other creators, other cultural creators. And certainly every day when I check my feeds, going back to our conversation about channels, the amount of art that's coming out, in my case, graphic art, about feelings towards COVID-19, dealing with it, isolation, physical distancing. When I'm seeing the artistic response to it, it's a really nice compliment to the news feeds that I receive. So it makes the whole experience richer, and it really, it feeds into this tapestry of what we're experiencing, or at least personally what I'm experiencing. Absolutely. And so seeing that, and this is again early days, generally speaking, to see what artistic endeavor, cultural response will come out in the next 6 months to a year to this, it will be both is really enticing and exciting, and I think will also it's a different kind of documentation. So whether folks are writing a diary or keeping a log or recording video chats or whatever it happens to be, we're going to see even more personal response through artistic means. Mm-hmm. And I think it's only going to add to our interpretation of how this is impacted transnationally.
Yeah, I think that's really great, and it's been really It's been really cool to see how many artists in a variety of different media are sharing and want to share. And so I'm going to provide some links at the bottom of the screen to your website, but maybe you could also share with me, and then I can share below the video too, some creators that you are following right now that you think that teachers might kind of be interested in also seeing their responses.
Sure. I'd also say too that since you're sharing the website, I think as part of this response, for example, we made all 6 issues of Group of 7 free to digitally download. So now
well, you should have just started with that, and then we could.
I should have started with that.
That's great. Everyone, go read comic books.
Right, go read comic books. So I mean, but that came from a place where Jason and I, the co-creators, we were seeing what was going on. For us, the digital artifact itself is out there already. Why don't we just take the price off it and say, hey, during these times, just enjoy, whatever, enjoy this. This is something that we've created. We're putting this out. Please take as you see fit and enjoy. And what that echoed, we got the idea from another comics creator, which I saw, but since then we put it on. I've seen other comics creators also do the same thing, where they're just making content available. And what I'm seeing is it's in an effort to provide art back into the world, and to remove any kind of barrier. Now, of course, there's other barriers, technological, access to network. That's a different conversation. But literally, so I've seen people, like, we talk about other creators who certainly I think fit into this mold, and certainly have done work in the history space as well. I know you're familiar with Scott Chandler.
Yeah.
As well, he just put up, for example, he has a Canadian hero called the Red Ensign, and he just put a 56-page PDF for free on his website for download, which is just which is a story that you actually can't get anywhere else if you were even a fan to begin with. And so again, but it's an idea to put content out without any kind of thought as to how it might be used, as opposed to just here. Right. People are just here. Here's a contribution. If this brings you any kind of joy or relief, or maybe it feeds into your thinking or teaching or learning, awesome. But it's, again, removal of barrier, I think, is the real, or as many barriers as possible. Is the real attempt. I've seen also another comic artist named Jay Stevens, who does work for Owl magazine, mm-hmm. and has a regular feature in Owl magazine called Arrowhead, which is geared at 9 to 12 to 14-year-olds and it actually does have a historical element to it as well, going back to the Admiral Arrow program. But point is, again, then I saw him release a whole Arrowhead comic, and it's again free download, take it, do what you want with it. So certainly there are specific things being released in the Canadian comics using history as inspiration space that are hopefully teachers can use, as I mentioned, Scott Chandler and Jay Stevens, but I am just seeing general art being produced. And whether it's a one-page webcomic, or whether folks are using, going back into their catalog and repurposing art and pages, that's a really fascinating thing. I've seen people release comics that they did 3 years ago, but now have a different feel because it's a different light and it's a different event. So it's just an interesting response. And then, I'm very excited selfishly, because I enjoy the work of all these people, is to see what else will come out of this. Because I think times like this do often spur creativity. The other thing I'm also seeing, which again goes into this art space, is I've seen some responses online to, oh, this is your time to create, and counter responses to say, hey, at the same time, you're under no pressure to create. This is not, oh, you have all this time, suddenly you should put it into this other activity. it's a really interesting balance of productivity and mental health and creativity. Anyway, sir, you're gonna say.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, because what I'm hearing are two different things, because it's like, one, there is this moment for this active creative response, but then also in releasing these things, that is also an acknowledgement of the kind of passive response, and like, just like consume, because like that's all you can do right now, and that's totally right. And I think that the more things that are out there that we can, and I say passively consume, like that sounds judgier than I'm intending it, but like,
I know what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
That it can then like spur this connection to be able to do more when you feel like you're in your best space to do it. And that's actually kind of the point of these videos too, right? Because when I had started, I recorded a video at the end of the second week of social isolation, and I was like, how do we teach history after this? And so many people came to me with such great responses that I was like, I don't know really what online teaching resources that teachers need, but like, if you want to listen to some people talk about it, let's have these really cool conversations. And so I'm glad we got to talk today, because like I had said, I was thinking about this mix that you have in your life between being an archivist and being this comic book writer that I thought would provide a lot of valuable insights, and I was right. So thank you.
This has been great. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, thank you.
Really appreciate you reaching out.
Yeah, of course, and hopefully we can find some other opportunities to collaborate and to be able to talk about the Group of 7 comic books. So thank you so much, Chris, and have a great rest of the day. Stay at home, as you should.
Thank you. I will, and I look forward to seeing you in person again in the future. It will come.
Yeah, it will come. Okay, see you later. Bye.
Bye.
I just feel so privileged to be having these conversations. Thank you again to Chris, and thank you to all of you for watching. I think one of the lessons that I'm really learning is that we get through this the best together. And so please let me know if you want to be a part of this conversation. You can comment below, of course, but you can also let me know if you want to do a Zoom talk, and we can have this conversation to be able to share with other history teachers. So thank you again, and look forward to a video tomorrow. I'm really excited about this series. Bye, everyone.